Chapter 3. As I hurried up the winding staircase to Gracina's turret, I tried to think of a way I could use magic to stop my froggy transformations. I was stepping onto the landing when I noticed the door to my aunt's room was wide open. Inside I saw Gracina and Haywood sitting on the love seat. It was obvious that their love was as strong as ever. For the first time I could remember, my aunt's eyes were as happy as her smile. Gracina turned to look at me when I stepped into the room. "Wherever you went," she said, "it must have been awfully important to take you away before breakfast. It smells delicious. Thank you for making it." "It needs salt," I said, "and I tried to use magic to get it. I pointed at the salt, said salt cellar, and ended up in the dungeon." Haywood winked at me and smiled. "These things happen," he said. "You just need to be more specific." Before turning into an otter, he had been a wizard in training and probably knew more about magic than I did. "You're so wise, precious one," Gracina told the otter, stroking his ears. "Oh, and I saw grandfather I said, before they could forget that I was there. We had a nice visit, and he helped me find the way out. He said Mother came down to look for me while I was away." "Mm-hmm," murmured Gracina, leaning down to kiss Haywood's head. Haywood turned to me. "Your mother must have been worried about you when you disappeared." The door banged against the wall behind me, and Edric rushed into the room. "There you are, Emma," he said. "I've been looking for you everywhere. You couldn't believe what happened when I was getting dressed. I put my shoes on, and then suddenly it turned back into a frog. It was so fast, too, not like the last time. I couldn't believe it at first, but it lasted only a little while, and then I was back to being me, and then it happened again. What's going on? Yesterday when we turned back, I thought everything would be all right." "It wasn't only you, Edric. I changed, too. Every time I sneezed." "Ah," said Haywood. "You sneezed. That explains it." "You know, I was afraid something like that might happen," said Gracina. "I was hoping you'd have more control of your magic before it did." Edric frowned. "I'm glad you understand. How about telling us what's going on?" "It's simple, really," said my aunt. "Emma's magic is strong, and she has to learn how to control it. Until she does, whenever she stresses her body, that stress is going to snap her back into whatever form she was last in. That means when she sneezed, it was an intense physical reaction, so she became a frog. And remember that your spell was linked, so you both had to turn back into humans, or you both had to remain frogs." I couldn't believe my ears. I already had enough problems with my magic, and now this? Why haven't I heard about this before? Haywood explained that it didn't happen often. Changing to another shape was generally discouraged among witches until they could exercise great control, but in my case it hadn't been a matter of choice. "So this could happen again?" I asked. Gracina nodded. "I'm afraid so. You'll need to work on your magic as much as possible. It's controlling you now, and that's not a good way to live. I know you wanted to go with us to see your grandmother, but perhaps you should stay here." I didn't like that idea at all. Sitting around the castle worrying that I might turn into a frog was the last thing I wanted to do. "I'd still like to go with you," I said. "I haven't visited grandmother for a while, and Edric wants to meet her before he returns to his parents' castle." "What's that I smell?" Edric asked. "Did someone make breakfast?" "I did," I said. "Why don't you—" Edric hadn't waited to be asked. Grabbing a plate of eggs, he carried it to a bench by the wall. After popping a bite into his mouth, he said, "These eggs are delicious, but they could have used a little salt." I rolled my eyes. "I've met Emma's other relatives, and I've heard so much about her grandmother," Edric said. "I'd like to meet her too. Emma, you should have seen it." He continued, turning to me. "Gracina sent a message to my parents saying I'll be all right. They can stop worrying now, and I can stay a little while longer. I'll have to wait a few days for Bright Country anyway. He still hasn't recovered from being turned back into a horse." Haywood twitched his whiskers. "Do you know what you're getting into? Emma's grandmother has a nasty way with suitors." "I'll just tell her we're friends," Edric said. "She can't object to that. Hey!" he shouted, jumping to his feet. "Something pinched me." Setting the plate on the bench, he rubbed his backside with one hand and thrust the other hand into his space between the bench and the wall, pulling out something small and golden brown. "Here's the culprit," he said, waving it in the air. "It looks like one of my crabapple dumplings," I said. I had enough experience with the nasty little things to recognize them even from across the room. Their flaky pastry had turned out well, but their claws that they'd grown after my magic went awry could deliver a painful pinch. I wouldn't eat it now, it's probably stale. Freshness didn't matter to Edric. After inspecting the golden brown crust and the squirmy kicking legs, Edric shoved the whole thing in his mouth and bit down. "You know, it's pretty good," he said, through a mouthful of pastry. "Are there any more?" "I hope not," I said, shaking my head, "but then I thought we'd found them all weeks ago. Maybe the rest of us should have some eggs too. Who knows when we'll get to eat again." "I've already had my breakfast," said Haywood. "Fish, fresh from the pot. Best way I know how to start the day." It took less time to eat the eggs than it had to cook them. When she was finished, Gracina set her plate aside and began to scratch Haywood behind his ears. Snuggling closer, he tilted his head from one side to the other. That feels great, he murmured. That's the spot. I grimaced and bit my lip. My normally calm, controlled aunt had not been herself since she found Haywood. Christina smiled and looked up at me. Emma, you and Edric are welcome to come with us if you want to, but there's no telling what might happen if your grandmother is involved. I'm not even sure we should attempt this. Your grandmother can be quite hateful and— Of course we should, I said. We'll talk to grandmother. I'm sure she'll do it. Christina sighed. No, I will talk to her myself. She is my mother, after all, and perhaps she will turn him back. Even if she refuses, what more can she do? She already turned him into an otter. I see the rumors are right, Christina, said a voice from the doorway, and we all turned our heads at once. I was surprised to see my mother standing there. It had been years since she had last visited her sister's chambers. My mother's lips were tight with her disapproval as her gaze swept over us. You do have an otter in your room. Why would you bring a creature like that into the castle? He isn't a creature, Mother. At least that's not all he is, I said. That's Haywood, the man that grandmother didn't want Christina to marry. Christina discovered him by the river when she was helping us. Isn't it exciting that they finally found each other? So, sister, our mother turned him into an otter and not a frog as you believed. When I heard that an otter was up here, I was afraid Emeralda had changed into another horrid animal since I last spoke with her. How are you, Haywood? Just fine, Chartreuse, and I see you're still your same sweet self. My mother frowned at the otter, then glanced at the wall behind him. A tapestry hung there just as it had for years. It showed the image of a woman, her long auburn hair streaming behind her. She stood on the parapet of a castle with her arms raised, and in each hand she held a ball of glowing green light. On the ground far below, the remnants of an army were in full retreat. Ah, said my mother, the tapestry of the Green Witch. I remember the day you got this, Christina. When we were little girls, who would have thought that you would have ended up with the title? I know you thought it would be you, Chartreuse, Christina said before turning to me. When we were young, we'd often play at being witches. Your mother always insisted on being the Green Witch. She was devastated when we learned I had the talent for magic and she didn't. But then magic chooses its own, doesn't it, Chartreuse? My mother's eyes were cold, but she didn't say another word. Haywood shoved his hand into the palm of Christina's hand, and my aunt bent down to scratch his ears. Mother groaned. I have a bad feeling about this, she said to me in a quiet voice. After they got engaged, Christina couldn't think about anything but Haywood, whether he was around or not. It didn't matter so much then, but that was before she was the Green Witch. It isn't an empty title, you know, Emeralda. On that day that Hazel, the Green Witch, was given that tapestry, she received the ring that Christina wears now. I glanced at my aunt, but I already knew which ring my mother meant. Carved from a single pale green gem, it looked like a band of tiny overlapping leaves. She'd worn the ring for as long as I'd known her. Every Green Witch since Hazel has worn it. Both the ring and the tapestry symbolize the power wielded by the Green Witch. It's her power that protects this kingdom. Without a Green Witch in Greater Greensward, the kingdom would be vulnerable to attacks. Edric had crossed the room to join us. Are you talking about trolls and werewolves? Trolls invade my father's kingdom a couple of times a year, and there are werewolf attacks every winter. Really? We've never had any problems like that, I said. Most kingdoms aren't as fortunate as ours, said my mother. Flocks of harpies, marauding goblins, or packs of werewolves are drawn to kingdoms without a powerful witch or wizard to protect them. Just knowing that the Green Witch is here is enough for deterrent for some, although she's been forced to demonstrate her power occasionally. I've never seen Christina fight anyone, I said. She hasn't had to for many years now. Her reputation is rather well known. I didn't understand. I'd lived with my aunt my whole life, but this was all new to me. I always thought it was father and his knights who kept invaders away. Your father is a good man and very brave, but the title means little to an army of trolls or a flock of harpies. Why didn't anyone ever tell me about this? Because you never needed to know about it before, said my mother. I heard a thud and turned to see Haywood scurry across the small table and peer into a bowl of water. A miniature castle rested in the bowl, but otherwise the water appeared to be empty. Licking his lips, Haywood stuck his muzzle in the water, then sat back on his haunches, making an awful face. Ugh, he said, it's salty. Oh no, my heart's delight, exclaimed Rosina. You mustn't drink that. Mother crinkled her lip in disgust. Heart's delight is what she called him when they were young, she whispered. We may have a problem if she's as besotted with Haywood as she used to be. She couldn't focus on anything that didn't concern him, and the rest of her life suffered from it. Our kingdom is in jeopardy if she's weak, no matter what the reason. Even now, trouble isn't far away. Your father should return home in a few hours, but he sent a courier ahead. His men discovered 2 spies at a local tavern. They escaped during the interrogation. Edric frowned. Spies in Greater Greensward? Mother nodded. We have to help Christina come to her senses. She has to forget about Haywood and take care of her responsibilities here. No matter what form he's in, I don't think she'll ever forget about Haywood, I said. But he might not be an otter for much longer. We're going to visit grandmother today and ask her to turn him into a man. Christina wants to ask for her help? My sister really is unbalanced. It was my idea, I said. Grandmother turned him into an otter in the first place, so she's the only one who can turn him back. Mother made a face as if she smelled something awful. I've never known you to be so meddlesome before. Someone must have been a bad influence on you. She turned her glare to Edric. Whoever thought of it, the suggestion is ill-considered. My mother has never helped anyone except herself. If you can think of a better idea, I began, get rid of the otter. Haywood has complicated Christina's life for long enough. But she loves Haywood. She'll be miserable without him. Then get your grandmother to turn him back, but do it quickly. My mother shook her head and glanced from Christina to Haywood. I have to prepare for your father's return. I must let him know what's happened here. I walked with Mother to the door, hoping to hurry her out. When I sent a message to your father telling him you were home, I didn't mention your refusal to marry Prince Jorge, she said, pausing at the threshold. I don't know how I'll break the news to him. I could just tell him myself. Perhaps it isn't necessary. I've been considering the problem, and it's obvious to me that you haven't thought this through. If we keep your little frog-kissing adventure to ourselves, you can still marry Jorge. Mother's voice dropped to a whisper as she glanced at Edric, who was eating again on the other side of the room. No one needs to know that you were a frog or disgrace yourself with that young man. What are you talking about, Mother? I asked, trying to keep my voice down as well. Edric is a gentleman. We didn't do anything wrong. They're all gentlemen until they have you alone. We were frogs, I said. We were trying to turn back into humans. What could... It doesn't matter what you actually did. You were alone with a young man who isn't related to you, and that's all people will need to hear. You know, of course, that's the worst thing that could have happened. Without beauty or grace, all you really had was your good reputation, and if that story gets out, you will no longer have that. But it may not be lost yet. If I hurry the wedding plans along and you don't say a word to Jorge, I'm not going to lie to him, Mother. I was sure that Jorge would hear about it eventually. Everyone in our castle probably already knew what happened. It was nearly impossible to keep a secret with so many ears around. My mother pursed her lips. Then tell your tale as often as you like, but you've made a grave mistake. I don't know what your father and I will do with you now. I doubt that even a convent will take you. I shouldn't have bothered to come back at all, I said. Perhaps you shouldn't have, Mother answered. As soon as my mother was gone, Haywood spoke up. Don't let your mother upset you, Emma. Although, if you want, I could take care of her for you. I was only a beginning wizard when Olivine transformed me, and not a very good one at that. But I do remember some basic spells. It would be easy to turn chartreuse into a magpie or a squirrel. They all like to hear themselves chatter. I laughed and shook my head. Your offer is tempting, but I'd rather not accept. If we're going to talk to my mother, we should probably leave soon, said Christina. Emma, why don't you and Edric take the carpet from the storage room? The day is too beautiful to spend cooped up in a carriage, and Haywood would have difficulty staying on a horse. Ask Lil where you can find the carpet. It was dark inside the storage room, the only light coming through a window as narrow as an arrow slit. Edric followed me through the door, stopping just inside when he saw the clutter. Something rustled in the rafters overhead, and I looked up. Lil was hanging by her feet amid dangling bunches of herbs. Lil, I said, it's me, Emma. It's about time, the little bat squeaked. Where did you go? 1 minute you were making breakfast, the next you were gone. Poof. I had a problem with my magic. I went to the dungeon by mistake. You know, those things do happen, said Lil, especially when you're new at it. Do you know where my aunt put the carpet? I peered into the darkened corners where I could only make out vague shapes. Sure do, I know where everything is. Your aunt's put me in charge of inventory. Carpet's over there behind that old mirror. Move the mirror aside. Watch out, it tilts. Yeah, that's it. That's the carpet. The carpet was rolled into a long tube set on end that leaned against a wall. Edric took one end and I took the other. It was heavy and awkward, but we soon wrestled it through the door and back into Christina's sun-filled room. Although the carpet was grimy on the outside, the colors were brilliant when we finally spread it in front of the window. Threads of scarlet, gold, navy blue, and cream shone in the sunlight in a repeating pattern of flowers and abstract designs. A wide rug, it would hold the 4 of us easily. Edric stepped back to look. You know, it's very nice, but what does it have to do with going to your grandmother's? This isn't an ordinary rug, Edric. It's a magic carpet, said Christina. It will carry us wherever we want to go. It's a very comfortable way to travel as long as the weather's good. Edric turned to me. Have you ever ridden on a magic carpet? Never, I said, but it looks like fun. I'm not sure I want to trust anything involving magic yet, he said. You just ate breakfast made by magic, I said. Here, Emma, said my aunt, holding out her hand. Put these in your pouch. You never know when you might need them. I did as she directed, tucking away an odd assortment of objects, a length of string, a small square of cloth, and a candle stub. When everyone was ready, Edric and I took our places on the magic carpet behind Christina and Haywood. With a few softly spoken words, Christina made the rug rise into the air. It moved in fits and starts, as if it wasn't quite sure what to do. I haven't used it for a while, my aunt said over her shoulder. The ride should improve once the rug gets a good airing. Just stay seated and hold on. What about the window? Edric asked, his eyes enormous as the rug jerked toward the narrow opening. We were only inches away when the sides of the window stretched like a smiling mouth, allowing us to slip easily through. Once we were through, the window snapped back into place with a loud twang. Christina chuckled. Don't worry, Edric, this isn't the first time I've done this.